Hey, it's Robin from Sean Petit's creative team. Today we're going to do a project that doesn't involve very much paint. We've got some ink stamps and some acrylic ink, and I'm going to use two of Sean's stencils. The first one is the Vintage Postage 1, and I'm also going to use one of the newer ones, the Whimsical Font 2, and then a collage pack, the Vintage Butterfly. My substrate today is an 8.5 by 11 piece of white construction paper. I'm going to start by drawing some lines. These are going to be guidelines for me to journal onto the page. They're about a half an inch apart. I'm just drawing them on the right side of the paper, about 3.5 inches, so not quite halfway across, but just a little bit under that. And what I'm going to be using these guidelines for is for Asemic writing. And Asemic writing is writing without semantics, and that is writing that's not really legible or has any meaning. And the way you do that is you make your M's and Q's and K's loopier. You make the letters that ascend exaggerated and descend exaggerated. It's kind of like Dr. Scribble, but a little more artistic. But when I do this, I want to journal onto my page, and I want to use positive words and positive thoughts and write the intention of what I'm trying to create. The way this Asemic writing incorporates your art and the viewer is by drawing the viewer in. The fact that it's not legible makes the viewer want to look a little more closely. And like other art, impressionist art, abstract art, the viewer's mind will fill in the blanks. So you just scribble along with intention, and I'm using a waterproof black micron pen to do this. And there is my best Dr. Scribble. The next step, I'm going to use the butterfly page out of the Vintage Butterfly Collage Pack. I like to tear the pieces rather than fussy cut them with scissors or just circular cut them with scissors. And that's because the piece I'm working on has more of a vintage look. And if I cut the edges sharp or fussy cut the butterfly out, then it would not look aged. I'm going to adhere that butterfly to the paper with a matte gel medium. However, because this is on construction paper and it's going to be behind glass, it's fine to just use a glue stick, but I've used matte gel medium here. Make sure you spread from the middle to the outer edges and get out all the wrinkles. You can also use a brayer to smooth out the edges. The next step is Sean's Vintage Postage 1 stencil. I'm using a black, it's called Nocturne ink. It's also not water soluble. I like to use circles in my art, and so this stencil is perfect for that because the vintage postage stamp images mimic that circle, but they have the added interest of the lettering from the postage stamp. Additionally, from this stencil, I'm going to use those wavy lines because I think they also mimic the circle or draw your eye into the design. What I'm trying to do with this is to create a composition that will draw your eye around the page. Now I'm using distressed ink and just an empty toilet paper roll. I like the distressed ink because when it reacts with water, it changes color a little bit. So after I place these stamps onto the page, then I can come back with a damp brush if needed and cause that ink to react. I also like the circles that are made by the toilet paper roll because they are incomplete. Just like I'm doing this now with a jumbo circle stencil, I'm making incomplete circles with it. I'm using a micron pen, which is also not water soluble. And then I'm going to break up those circles with some straight lines and the ruler. Again, in black ink. I have a limited palette with this project. Blacks, browns, white, and a little amber, burnt umber color. This is a new favorite trick of mine, shelf liner. This is a scrap of shelf liner. I'm pressing it into the stamp pad, and I'm using the back side of the shelf liner, and it creates a great little dotted grid. I also like to use this, pressing it, not inking it every time I press and make an imprint. And so I like the variance in the way the ink prints after you've stamped it more than once. And I've used that in kind of a zigzag pattern. I'm going to bring in Sean's stencil, the Whimsical Font 2, and I'm using painter's tape to block off around the letters that I'm using because I don't want to do consecutive letters. I'm using the Ranger Walnut Stain stamp ink pad, and I like to use letters that are both rounded and have hard edges, and the same with the numbers. I'm integrating letters and numbers into this piece, and I'm varying the letters and numbers I use by some that have hard edges and soft edges. The 7 has a hard edge, and I think the 7 is almost like an arrow to bring you back into the piece from the edge, and the B was a soft edge which brought you into the piece with its circles. I am also, with these stamps, using a combination of the brown and the black ink. Now I'm going to bring in the acrylic ink. I believe that is burnt umber. It's not really a dropper, but it does have a big bead on the edge, and I'm adding faux drips to the piece with this. I'm dripping them back from the butterfly wings. I'm dripping them back from the postage stamp. Just random drips. And this acrylic ink dries very quickly, so you don't have to wait for that. That's the beauty of this piece, is most of the media that I use are quick drying, and so there's not a lot of waste. I didn't think the circles that I made with the template were prominent enough, so I added this Posca pen and redrew my circles on the piece with the Posca pen to make them more prominent, both the circles and the vertical lines. The Posca pink comes in many colors, but my favorites are the black and white because they are water fast and they do make a varying point tips, so you can make anywhere from fine point to thick tip depending on the pens that you buy. The next step in the video is going to be where I add gesso to the edges of the butterfly image. This softens the edges so that your focus is not on the torn edges, but it puts that more into the background. I do the same thing with the gesso on some of the handwriting, the Asemic writing, so that it doesn't look perfect, because that's what an aged letter would look like. You also will see some rust colored marks on this piece at the point. What I did with that, which didn't get recorded, was I used the golden high flow acrylics, the nickel azo gold color. I simply dropped it in straight out of the container, sprayed it with a water bottle, and lifted the paper vertically so it could drip down. Drips and drops are some of the best things to add to a vintage piece. Finally, I'm going to add a little splatter. You can't have drips and drops without splatter. I'm using that same burnt umber ink. I put it in a small bottle and stuck a sprayer into that bottle, sprayed the ink onto it, and then pressed with a paper towel to release some of that ink. Finally, I've got a piece that's kind of disjointed and I want to focus on it. So I get a mat. It's a 5x7 opening in an 11x14 mat, and you want to find your sweet spot. And the sweet spot here to me was Nature's Angel, and that's the butterfly. So you can frame that and it'll look beautiful in a black frame because it will bring out the colors that we use today. Thank you for watching. And if you want to find out more about me, Chestnut Grove Studios, please like and subscribe.